finding the referenced items. How do we know where these referenced items live? A lot of times we look at a multi-list, and there's no information other than the display name or the name of the item. So finding those items, a lot of times we have to go up to raw values. Now, how many of you guys have switched databases? You want to take a look at the item that you're working on. You want to take a look at that in the production database. And when you do this, what does sitecore do? It closes the content manager, and you lose your spot in the tree. So you need to remember where you are, only to boot up the content manager and find yourself finding the content. And navigating the tree can be cumbersome. We talked about a sitecore solution with hundreds of thousands of content items. And those item paths can be long, and the tree can be very deep. So it can be very cumbersome to walk that tree and remember the item path. So those are a few examples of how I hope that the field suite is going to take these on and tackle those. So let's run through a few simple scenarios. So here we're looking at a multi-list, and it's referencing 5 items. And we need to edit one or many of those items. How do we do that? Where do these items live? Next, we're approached with 2 list items here with the same title. Now, by looking at this real quick, we don't know if this is the same item added twice or 2 items with the same name. And in order to find this out, we have to go up to raw values and check out the GUIDs. And we also have to, mind you, remember the position that it's in the field. Is it in the 2nd position, the 3rd position? And I also like to note, for content authors, they regularly and by default don't have the availability to go into raw values. So the last scenario we have here are these items published? Now we just don't have enough information here to say, all right, the About Us item, how does that item compare with the authoring environments item to the production environments? Does the item exist? Do the field values match? Maybe it's maybe the name's changed since then, or the path. Maybe someone moved it to a different directory. So contextual awareness. What is contextual awareness? And this is a term that we've been throwing around with the field suite for some time now. And what it means is it's to give the content authors the ability to understand what they're seeing here on the right. To take a look at this screenshot, something that they've been authoring for maybe 5 minutes. Maybe authoring this item's taken 2 weeks. We could be waiting on different assets from a division of the company. We could be waiting for a conference to start in a couple weeks. It could just be the approval process, the workflow process. But nonetheless, during these 2 weeks, we've gone and we've made changes to these referenced items. This item's spiderwebbed out through the sitecore content tree. So we've gone in, we made changes to contact CNF. We made changes to generating higher demand. And it all looks good in the production or in the authoring environment. But when the time comes and we publish this to the production environment, we play a game of cat and mouse. Right? How many times have you published something and immediately open it up in the production environment to see how it looks, just crossing your fingers that everything matches with that in preview mode, and maybe the authoring environment. So contextual awareness, that term means, and the field suite provides this. Contextual awareness means having an understanding of the item that we're authoring, and not only the specific item that we're authoring, but its surroundings, where it's spiderwebbing out to, its reference items. And when we don't have contextual awareness, a lot of times we get tickets directly related to publishing. Now I know I've gotten a lot of tickets, a lot of phone calls, or urgent emails saying, hey, I published this item, and it's out in production now, and it's erroring out. Maybe it just doesn't match with the authoring environment. We need someone to look at it ASAP. I'm sure the majority of you guys have come across that. I have as well. And the field suite provides functionality to let the content owners know how their item and their reference items, how those compare in the production environment. And the last challenge is we just need more information for the content owners. We need to provide them with information as to how this item compares, where this item lives, maybe what template this is derived from.
Yeah.
And the field suite comes in and provides a more streamlined and informational approach.
Okay.
So at this time, I'd like to back out of the PowerPoint presentation and then go right into sitecore and provide a demonstration of how the field suite takes a look at some of these challenges and provides solutions for them. Yeah. So here we're in the content manager, and we're on this item here called sitecore multi-list, and it's very simple. It just has a multi-list in it. We're just looking at sitecore multi-list. Now, the first piece of functionality that I want to call out that the field suite's going to bring to you, that's going to really help you out with, the field suite bundles in a module that I created a couple of years ago. It's called the published item compare. And down and dirty, real simply, what it does is it takes an item. Currently, right now, the item that we're on in the tree, and it compares that item to the item in the production database. Runs through a series of validations, out of the box or custom. And it tries to determine if that item is published and if there are any discrepancies between the two environments, between the authoring environment and the production environment. So we can see this within the ribbon if we go up to the publishing tab. And here we have a chunk called the item compare. And it tells us right away if there is a discrepancy, if it did or did not pass the item compare as well. Here it did not. And we have two options. We can open the item compare application, which will give us a detailed view, or we can take a look at that same item on the target database. So we talked about the scenarios when you go down to the right-hand corner and you change databases, right? And what does sitecore do? It closes your content manager and opens up a new default one. You have to start all over again. You lose your track. Here we're lucky we don't have a deep content tree here. But say we did, and we wanted to take a look at sitecore multi-list in the production environment. Simply, we can just click this target database. What it does is it opens up an additional content editor down here, and we can view that item's field values, the ribbon, anything in this environment we need to view. So we can see that here are the items that are selected, and when we go back here, we can see there's a difference. Now what is that difference? Maybe we just wanted to see right off the bat. We don't have to examine that item in the production environment. And by opening up the item compare application, we can see that the validation that failed is it's telling us that the fields are different. And it tells us right here, it shows us the difference between the two. So here, it allows the user to have an understanding of how this item compares to that in the production environment. So we can see that the generating higher demand exists or is selected in the production environment, but not in the performance environment. So let's go take a look at some of the field types that we created and the functionality that comes along with those fields. some of the core functionality of the field suite. So here I'd like to introduce you to the field suite's multi-list. And as you can see, it looks like a multi-list, feels like a multi-list, except it just has a little bit of a UI upgrade to it. We can see here where we have template icons next to the name of the item, and when we hover over those, we're presented with a tooltip. So we know visually that the About Us item, the Contact Us item, is of the template icon that we can see. And if we're curious, if we just want to know a little bit more information, we're able to hover over the icon and get that template name. Now, if we go back to the scenario we talked about before, where we wondered where the About Us item is, where the Contact Us item is, previously we'd have to go up to raw values, switch over. Here we don't have to do that. The field suite alleviates that for you. We can simply, instead of hovering over the template icon, we can hover over the title, and it presents us with the path of the item. So right away we know where this item is, and we can navigate right down to it. Another piece of functionality that the field suite brings to us is allows us for inline editing. And we talked about the example before where we're authoring out a piece of content and we're previewing this in preview mode, and we notice that maybe the About Us item or the Contact Us item, there's some grammatical mistake, or we need to make a modification to that item. So normally we find that item in the tree, navigate to it, open it up. Well, what the field suite provides you with is a more streamlined approach to that. When you're authoring content, let's try to stay on the item that we're authoring. Less movement around. So we know where the item lives. We hover over it. But the field suite provides us with the edit form. And we can simply single click this item, and that puts it in a highlighted state. And then we can go and click the edit item button. Now what this does is it opens up the edit form as a modal and allows us to edit the field values of the item that we selected. So here, we're simply just rendering a content editor, just the same way the content manager is doing on the right side. And we're passing it the ID of which we want to view, and we can see we're on the About Us item. We have our quick info here. You can see everything there is here. And we can make modifications. So let's say, maybe this guy wanted his name to be Timothy, right? So we can go in here, make a simple modification. And we can go up and hit save, content saved, and close. It's as simple as that. And we can go ahead and preview this item again, and we can see our change. We don't have to navigate the tree. Now, the edit form's great. It's going to allow us to do a lot of edits real quick, but the thing is, it doesn't provide us with everything. It doesn't provide us with the ability to right-click the context, right-click the item in the tree, take a look at the context menu. It doesn't allow us to view that item's ribbon. So how do we do that? There are times where we need to view that item's ribbon. It could be a custom ribbon, could be some information in there we need to know. Well, we know if we hover over one of the list items, we can get the item path. But the field suite, in the streamlined approach, tries to give you a little bit more. So it provides you with this go-to item button. And what it simply does is, it makes a request to sitecore. It says, let's change the context. We want to go from the current item that we're on, and we want to change it to the selected item in the tree, in the reference number. So we have about us selected here, and we can say go to item. And it automatically opens up the about us item tray. There we go. And here we can see the change that we made. We can go up to the ribbon and we perform some action. And we can right click it, maybe perform another action. Maybe we looked at the path of this item and realized that, hey, this shouldn't be under the research folder, it should be under the development folder or whatnot. So here we can say go to item and perform a simple move on that item. So, you might have been looking at the multi-list here and wondering what these green and red circles represent. Are they template icons? Because I see template icons already there. So what is that? So what they represent is new functionality called the field gutter. And what the field gutter is, all you have to think of it as, from a technical point of view, is it's a little piece of real estate in each one of these reference items. And that piece of real estate can implement this functionality called a gutter item. And it can return some HTML to the content authors to provide them with a little bit more information. So what we have going here is we've wired up the published item comparer to the field gutter. So we have an implementation of the field gutter, or implementation of the item comparer within the field gutter. And what it does here is when we're rendering this field, it checks to see if it has any gutter items, and it performs the render on that. And the published item comparer says, hey, for the about us item, let's go and check that item. Let's run it through the published item comparer's validation and see if it passes or not. If it passes, we get a nice green circle. If it doesn't pass, we're presented with a red circle. So right away, it allows the content authors to immediately look at the item they're authoring. And they can see that up in the ribbon, that their item that they're authoring, if it passed validation. And then they can come down to their field values, and then for each one of those, understand how that item, how that referenced item compares to the same environment in a different database in your production environment. So it goes back to contextual awareness. We talked about contextual awareness as being the author, the content author, having the ability to understand his or her surroundings, to understand how this item and this item's references compare to that of the production environment. And here we can see that the item up in the ribbon is passed all validation. And we can see that its reference items, about us, contact us, globals, they did not pass. Now why is it they didn't pass? We can see that there's a red circle, but why? What is the reasoning? Well, we can hover over these, and we have some title text. The item passed validation. We can hover over about us. The item did not pass validation. Now what makes the field gutter, that little block of real estate, so valuable is that it just returns HTML. So anything you can do in HTML, the field gutter can do. So what the item comparer's implementation is doing is saying, listen, if it doesn't pass, then let's present it with an anchor, with an on-clicker app. So we can allow the content authors to click it and open up the published item comparer application. So they can see right away validation, fail, and the differences between the two items. Another thing too, in an effort to make it a more streamlined experience for the content authors, we can publish these items. So for example, if we look at this and say, oh yeah, well, his name definitely should be Timothy and not Tim. Maybe it's like some lawyer, it has to be like really specific. We can do that right here on the fly. And as long as it passes Sitecore's regular publishing constraints, as long as it has a valid workflow, it's not set as unpublishable, as long as Sitecore says it's okay to publish it, it'll be published. And the content authors can simply go in and say publish item, and you can see that the application's refreshed and our values have gone up there. Okay, so we talked about the field gutter, and we touched a little bit on publishing. Let's expand on publishing. Let's say we've been working on this item for 2 weeks. Let's say we're waiting on a web conference, and we're ready to publish. We look at it in preview mode, see it in the staging environment, all looks good. We publish it out, and it doesn't look anything like the one in the author environment. So we start running around trying to figure out what it is. And 10-15 minutes later, we figure out that we forgot to publish one of the referenced items. Now here, we can see that the About Us, the Contact Us, and the Global items, they didn't pass validation. But if we went back to the multi-list, the general Sitecore multi-list, we just don't have that contextual awareness as a content author to realize this. So what the field suite's trying to do is provide some more information and a streamlined approach to not only giving you more information and to editing the field values, but also within the publishing process itself. And it does this by tapping into the publishing pipeline. And so when you publish, there's a step in there called Add Items to Queue. And what the field suite's going to do in this scenario is if we publish this item here, field suite multi-list, let's just imagine that the field suite multi-list has children, there's descendants underneath there. When we go up to publish item, we can say smart publish, we'll say publish sub-items. Let's just pretend for presentation's sake that there are sub-items. What the field suite's going to do is it's going to go into the publishing process, and it's going to, during the time where it adds the item to the publishing queue, it's going to say, what's the lead item being published here? Not the children. We don't care about the children. What's the lead item? And in this case, it's the field suite multi-list. And let's go through that item and grab all its referenced items. And let's add those to the publishing queue. And so when we publish this, what we're going to see is it's going to add those guys in there. So we really published one item, right? We're just on one item. But it's also gone through its referenced items and published those out as well. And that's why we get items process 6. And if we look at the details, we can see 3 were updated, 3 were skipped. Maybe it's a smart publish, so maybe it didn't need to publish those again. But it did update 3. So let's go ahead and close this, and let's reload this item. And we can see that once we refresh this item, that they all come back in valid state. Now I want to point out that the auto-publishing of referenced items is not for every Sitecore solution. There is the ability to toggle this functionality on or off within the configuration file. It's a simple application key, comes default, set to on, value 1.
Thank you.
If you want to shut this off, you can simply default it back to the standard Sitecore functionality by setting that to 0. If you want to target for specific templates, so you only want specific templates, wants to have this auto-publishing enabled, maybe an article or a research item, you can do that. You can assign those templates within the configuration file. So I want to point out that if this auto-publishing scares anyone, you can have the field suite without having the auto-publishing. It's the ability to turn this on and off. But what it gives us is a streamlined approach. It allows the content authors to publish this item and its referenced items. And again, falling in line with the sitecore practices and sitecore constraints, if any one of those items could not be published, whether it's due to workflow or other settings, it's only going to be skipped by the publishing process. It's not going to actually push it out to the environments that you selected. So, I'd like to talk to you about another scenario in regards to a lot of the web development that we've been doing lately. A lot of the web pages that clients are calling for today have to do with landing pages. And on landing pages, we usually get carousels or some sort of images, a list of images, right? And we usually build this out in the template, and let's call the field carousel, and for the field type, more often than not, we'll select a multi-list, maybe a tree list EX. And that does the job. But it leaves a lacking component there. It doesn't provide the content authors with a bridge. They can't look at that carousel field, that tree list, and say, all right, we have our 4 or 5 slides here, and I'm looking at the web page, and which slide is which? I can't tell which one is which here. So let's go back to sitecore and look at what this example would look like. So here is an exact replica of what we're looking at on the landing page there, on the carousel. We can see we get 2 group shots. One, they're bookmarked, and then the in-between, we have 4 contractors. Contractor H, L, S, and M. Now, I don't know which one's which, and I can't take a look at, I can't say that contractor L relates to this one, or maybe to this one. I just don't know. So what this does is it brings up a requirement. We need more information, we need more visualizations. And that's where the field suite comes in and introduces a whole new field for us. A new field that allows us to take these list items, those slide items, whether they're media items within the media library, or whether they're content items within the content tree, and assign them. So let's go take a look at that new field. So here is the images field, brand new field, built for the field suite. And we can see that we have our first group shot here, the first slide followed by George Harris and John Lennon. We're able to make the relationship by taking a look at this field and then comparing it back here. So if we start it over again, if we reload the page, we have our group shot, followed by George Harrison. We go back to sitecore, and that's what we got. And it allows the content authors to visually see this and to see how the carousel is going to lay out. They might look at this and say, you know, I want to move things around. I want to move, let's move Paul up here to this location and John Lennon up to this one. I think this one should be last, right? So let's move this over here and then select this group shot up to the first position. So we can save and we can publish this. back, we have our changes. So it's really easy now for content authors to distinguish what slide is what, where it relates to in sitecore. So we have this, as before as we had this. So we're able to have a clear recognition of our slides. And as this is the second field type that I'm showing you from the field suite, it has all the same functionality that I showed you in the field suite's multi-list. We're able to hover over this and get the title. We have the field gutter, the template, edit item, go-to item. So it's all there. All that functionality is standard across all the field suite's field types. So there's 4 other fields I want to show you, and we're going to go through those real quick. So we took a look at the images field,
And then Allison, I just.
and here we have a drop link.
Your,
Here we can go in and say,
delivery, when is that scheduled?
maybe we want it to be
This Friday?
contents or sample items.
Thank you.
So it's the same field. It just revamped for the field suite, allowing all that functionality to be in. Same thing with the drop tree. We're able to go in here
I know we have analysis.
and make a selection. And if we need to edit that selection,
But we'll have to wait till these documents.
we can come up here and make that.
So I would say we would probably search.
Let's say we notice there's 2 periods in here, and let's just bring that down to 1. Perform a save. Now, when we close this, watch what's going to happen. Let's see here. You see that the field gutter, the published item preparer, is calling it out as in a valid state. It matches currently that of the production environment. So when we close the edit window, what it's done is send a call back and said, hey, we need to update that field. Not just the field, it's just updating the field gutter. So, and this is standard functionality. If we do the same thing on the tree list,
All right.
it will go ahead and do that. So here we have the About Us item. We can perform
Tomorrow.
the same thing here.
Is that okay?
Set this to 10.
I know, I'm just running out of time today.
And here it's updated. And it doesn't perform an update for every single one. It's very light. All it's doing is saying, for this item that we're closing that's in this field, let's go ahead and update that field gutter. So it represents real time any changes that we make. So we have the drop tree, the tree list here, and the tree list EX. So in total, what does the field suite provide us with? It's providing us with 5 revamped field types, a whole slew of functionality that's geared towards information and a streamlined approach. And it's providing us with a brand new images field, which we can use for carousels or showing multiple images on maybe a right rail or a header. Okay, at this time I'd like to go back into the PowerPoint presentation and continue on with our next topic of discussion, which is module best practices. Okay, best practices. When you're building your module, you don't want to just start out and just start running, right? You want to come up with a more architectural, engineered solution as to what you're trying to do. You don't want to get your module completely built out, and at the very end, maybe just before a code review, you're scurrying along and trying to get this thing up to be maybe more abstractable, more comments and stuff. You want to try to get into the pattern of doing this as you're building out your module. So let's take a look at some of the best practices that I've called out in this presentation that I like to use. And I'm sure there's many more out there as well. So, decouple your code. This is especially important for modules. You have to remember that every sitecore version is different. And every sitecore solution is different. You implement it on one site, and it's a little bit different. You implement it on another site, and it's different. It could be different in China or Japan. And it also presents different scenarios. Now, as developers, it's our job to try to think of these scenarios when we're building these solutions. But obviously we can't think of everything. But by decoupling our code, by presenting it in the configuration file, it allows all the developers down the line to say, you know, this module is great, and I just wish I could tweak this one thing. Or maybe I need to call out to this external database and do one piece of action here. And with the field suite, specifically with the field gutter here on the top portion of the screenshot, we're exposing, in line with Sitecore's practices, the processor, so the main functionality that runs the field gutter. And then we're also allowing for these different gutter items. It's not hard-coded. If someone doesn't want to show the item compare field gutter, they could comment this out. If they want to implement their own, they can do so. If they want to implement both, have 3 of them, they can do so. Targeted by template, targeted by directory. Whatever it is you build into your logic, you can do so. And these are backed by interfaces. So it binds a contract between your gutter item and your processor. So all the processor needs to do just needs to know about a method. And I believe for this one, it's called execute. So all it does is iterate through these gutter items. Performs a simple execute. A gutter item can return an empty string and can return a whole slew of HTML. Now just to recap, this field gutter, the gutter item, that was the red circle and the green circle that you were seeing in the field suite. So decouple your code. It makes your module valuable. Comment. Use as much comments as you can. Explain what the configuration file is. You'll see the field suite's configuration file is rather large. And for anyone, especially someone who hasn't seen it before, for anyone to go into any of these configuration files and expect to know what a gutter item is, what a placeholder item is, they're not going to know. So you need to be mindful that people are going to download your module and make modifications to it. And so they need to know how to make modifications to it. They need to understand how the configuration file is set up. Okay. Next slide. Module directories. These should live under the Sitecore modules folder. This is a folder that Sitecore gives you. And they provide 2 subfolders under there. Web, for any modules that really geared towards the more web side of the things, right on the website, not Sitecore proper. And then you have the shell folder, and that's modules that run really inside of Sitecore proper, within the shell application. So the field suite has a folder under shell, and it tries to allocate all its assets within this folder. And that includes XAML files, JavaScript style sheets, and really most importantly, images. Now, how many of you out there have done customizations to Sitecore? Made XAML apps, whatever it might be. Okay. Now when you make these modifications, when you add these XAML files, how many of you guys reference Sitecore icons, their images, within their themes directory? Okay. What I'm recommending is best practice. They provide you with tons tons of great images, is that every image that you use, that you have an availability to use there, whether it's for like a button, or just showing it within your XAML file, or somewhere within your module,
Still on track.
even though it exists under the themes directory, under sitecore, we go back to the same point that every sitecore solution is different. Maybe one solution has not unzipped their zip files. Maybe one solution is not reading from their zip files. Maybe for whatever reason they don't have that icon. So what we want to do by having a module directory is create our own little contract, so that when we install our module, all our images live under the module directory. And we can be assured that whether this gets installed on 6.4 or 6.6 or anywhere throughout the globe, that our images will be referenced correctly and will show correctly because they're listed in our module directory. The last point I want to make is XAML files. Now, for the most part, I usually put my XAML files under the layout directory. Who does that? I usually put them under the layouts directory. And the reason is because out of the box, sitecore has the layouts directory as a control source. Now, I didn't know this until some time ago, but that's configurable. And I didn't know why the layouts folder was the place for XAML files. So within your configuration file, in the include directory, you can add your own control source, and sitecore will pick up on this. So what we're doing here is we're saying, all right, we have our module directory, we're listing it there. We don't need to go deep because it's not in a nested folder. And we want sitecore to recognize this directory as a control source for XAML apps. So when sitecore starts up, it's going to recognize this, and when we call for our XAML app, it'll be recognized. We won't just get a white screen. So those are a few of the best practices that I wanted to share with you. So to recap, to go over the presentation, what the Field Suite tries to do is present the content author with an upgraded experience, a more streamlined and informational approach to content author. It tries to give them information such as whether the item exists in the production database, what the item's path is. It allows that user to be contextually aware of the items that they're working on. And it challenges, or it solves some key challenges that we talked about before and that are listed here. Some of the key things are inline editing. We don't really need to know where some of these referenced items are. We can simply select it, open up the edit form, edit them right there. And the auto-publishing is a win-win right there. So, in closing, we'd like you to contribute. We have this up on GitHub. Not yet for older folks, but we so we'd like you to contribute. We have this up on GitHub. I have my contact information here, my Twitter information. We have a blog post currently up on the Valir blog. We have an instructional guide that will walk you through basic usage of all the different field types and functionality that we talked about today. And it also tells you how to customize the Field Suite, how to add in your own field gutters, your own field placeholders, and other things that can be customized within the Field Suite. And lastly, we have sitecore packages available, and there's 2 sitecore packages. One package installs the proper Field Suite module, and it puts those field types as new field types under a new folder in the core database. And then the second package, which you would install afterwards, which would be an optional package is the second package overwrites your existing sitecore multi-list, tree list, your existing sitecore field types. So for example, if you already had a sitecore solution up and running, and you want to install this without changing up all your templates, you can install a field suite, package A, then you can come through with package B, install that, and sitecore is naturally going to render that multi-list and how it's defined in the core database. And by installing that sitecore package B, we don't have to change the templates, and the field suite will be rendered when you load up an item in the content manager. So at this point, I'd like to open it up for questions.
For the sitecore images field, if I want to use a non-media library item, is it possible to configure a template to render, for example, a thumbnail field in that images field?
So for example, if you're working with,
Yeah, so I do have
oh,
a
so
copy on that.
let me just repeat the question for people on,
Today.
on link here. So the question was, for the images field, if we're using like a non-images item, let's say MP3s, or not an MP3 item in the media library, but maybe a content item that links to an MP3 that has an abstract field, a title field, and all this stuff, whatever the case is. So what we can do is we can create, this is part of the customizations, we can create our own implementation of that image field. And it's an image item. So we create our own implementation of Ivalier image. And we, in our configuration file, we can assign that to certain templates. And so when those certain templates, when the criteria meets, maybe we can show like a wave or just some sort of an icon to represent that. And if we were to take a look at how to do that within the configuration file, and make this bigger. So here we have the block and the configuration for the images field. I'm going to highlight it for the people here on IM. And what we can do here is put in a dynamic example. And the images field needs to know, for this template, what's your images field? It's not going to scan through the item. It needs to know what your images field is. And an optional thing it needs to know is it needs to know the title field. And if we leave it says up here, if we leave it blank, if we leave the title field blank, it will just fall back to the display name of the item. But if we wanted to point it like in a carousel, maybe we might use an abstract field. So for this, if we want to mimic the abstract, if we want to mimic the carousel, we could type in abstract there. And that would be the title field for that as it's displayed in the images field. So going back to your point, what we would do here is we create a mapping item, and we map that to the template, or we can comma pipe delimitate those templates. And then what we do is in our class library, we'd inherit from the Ivalier image interface, and then produce our logic there. And that method, it implements a method, it might be called execute or render, and that takes in a list of arguments, and with those arguments, you can define the output of that item, that specific item that would be rendered.
How does that work with page editor?
It's a good question. It's still under testing, I believe. Yes, I haven't tested it with page editor. If you want to speak to it.
Yeah, so some of the functionality works in page editor. There are some small issues with, so for example, the buttons that produce modals in content editor, like edit, like link to item, stuff like that. So
version 2?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a, you know, for example, like I guess in Alana's case, if you're editing an item and you can't necessarily go to the item in page editor mode, or, so yeah, there is by default, by sitecore standards, there's a checkbox that will toggle a button within the page editor mode. That's a good question.
Back to the images field, how do you add new items to the media list?
So first,
Okay, sure,
the
yeah.
images field is unique in that it needs to be set up first. So for example, you're building out your templates, and you know, for the most part, what templates are going to be part of that carousel, or whatever you want to use it for. And so you need to go out and build out this configuration with the mappings. Now, let me just switch over to my sandbox here, and I'll show you an example. So here, we have for the contractor and employee items, employee templates, we have their template ID. And we're basically telling the images field, for these templates, right here, that we're defining the title field as abstract. Now that's a little block of text underneath the images. And we're defining the images field, the image field, as photo. And so for each template that you want to work with the images field, it needs to be mapped here within the configuration file.
No, what I meant was on the actual field in the content editor, like it doesn't show you available or selected. It just shows you what you have selected.
I think I know what you mean here. So if we go here, and if you say you want to add in an item,
Yeah.
okay, let's add in an item here. We're going to say link item. That's going to open up a XAML form, and this is it knows the source of the field, so we can come here and we can define media items in here because it has a mapping within the configuration file. We can also go up. We can go up to content, home. I love these lists here. Contacts. Now let's say, I know this one's John Lennon, so I'm going to add this one in. And at the end, it added in our other John Lennon. Does that answer your question?
Yep.
Do you lose any default functionality? Like say you're supposed to be multi-list. So one thing is you can double click a item, usually send it from left to right, or
Right.
keyboard shortcuts or anything like that.
Yeah, so what Corey's saying is, do we lose any functionality? With the multi-list, we're able to double click these guys and they go over to the selected side. Unfortunately, we do lose the double click ability, and that's why we have these plus and minus buttons, where we can add these guys over and in turn and bring them back.
And why did we do that?
We hit some roadblocks along the way with trying to figure out if it was a double click or a single click. And Sitecore uses a list box with list items in there. And so when you select an item, you can do that with a single click. And when we select an item, we're not selecting a traditional list item. We're selecting a div and putting a border on that with a background, so it shows the user as that item is being highlighted or selected. So I had some difficulty trying to figure out if it was a single click or a double click, because a lot of times when I would double click, the single click event would also fire, and then sometimes vice versa. Matt?
When using the images field, can you create new items for that field to use, like, without
item?
Yeah, not out of the box, but it's definitely customizable, so you can do that. And so Matt's question was, can we customize the images field, or really any field for that matter, and possibly maybe put a button on there, a field button, that says add new content item. Well, we can do that by going into the core database and creating a new button to have that functionality. So we'd have to do some customization. But really the customization is just adding the button in the core database. But the real work is going to come into the logistics, actually putting that in there. But yeah, there's methods in there that you can create an item and then call a JavaScript method that will insert a new deliver images item into the deliver images or the images field. Anything else? Dan?
Yeah, go-to item, that changes the frame in place, or does that open up another frame?
So the question was, go-to item, what does that do? Does it change our context or change our spot in the tree? So what it does is, it's an already existing sitecore command that we're utilizing. I forget it off the top of my head, but all the command does is change our context. So we're able to say, the about us item is in a selected state right now. What item is in the selected state, grabs that GUID, and then passes it to the command, and the command knows what to do from there. And it basically just moves us from our current spot up to where the about us item is located. And it automatically opens up the tree. Is that what you're asking?
Well, I guess I was wondering whether it would have technical difficulty to open it up in another frame, because that might be more easy.
Totally, yep.
Okay.
Yep, it's totally possible. Mike?
If you were to click on one of those non-edited ones and edit it,
Non-edit, yes.
just one of the ones that pass validation. So in here, you said, if you make a change and then you close it, it updates back. If you close out of this browser window without hitting the close button, will it still?
Like the X or something?
Yeah. Will it still update the?
Let's find out.
Alright.
Let's make a small change here. So the question was, is if we make a change here and don't hit the close button, we just exit out of the modal, will it still update field guard? So I just saved it. We have our answer. It's in an invalid state. We can hover over that and see exactly what's up. Let me see if, let me take a look at the link just to make sure there's no questions over there. Okay. Thanks, Peter. Any other questions? Yeah, happy to answer them. Chris?
What's next for the field suite?
What's next for the field suite is for us all to contribute as developers to increase and to better the content authoring experience, to make it even more streamlined and to make it more informational. Doesn't stop from here.
Sweet is an
Keep going.
aspirational name.
Matt?
I saw you advertising a NuGet package for this tool. How does that interact with my sitecore solution as far as setting up the fields?
So
Or can't it?
I'm trying to get the NuGet package to work correctly. And I am having some trouble with it, but I do have regular sitecore packages. If it does come down to it, we could just host a sitecore package up there. Not really on shared source, but just up on GitHub or something. And then wherever you host these things, and we can still get all the download information and whatnot.
Have you worked with Ethan on that?
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah.
So if you're, so just
another thing I would like to mention is this has been tested on 6.6, 6.5, 6.4. I ran into problems with 6.3, so the compatibility is 6.4, 6.5, and 6.6. The issue I was having with 6.3 is between 6.4 and 6.3 they have changed
Okay.
their
Yeah.
editor, how they render these items in a content editor, and it invalidated the editor we were using in the field suite.
All right. Yeah, I'll wait up the stand up
Do
tomorrow.
you have a wish list for contributions?
Sorry?
Do you have a wish list for contributions?
Yeah, I do.
Tomorrow.
Currently, there's a specialized tree list. It's a shared source module by Mark. I forget his last name. But I was in contact with him about incorporating his specialized tree list into the field suite. And what it allows for is a search right there and then, which has autocomplete. But there is some limitations to it. That's why I didn't add it straight in. There needs to be some work in regards to, it doesn't take into effect the source of the item.
I do have enough
Source
on
of
that,
the field.
because I
So that's something that needs to get worked on. So really, there's two things I have at the forefront of my mind.
So,
Is
yeah.
getting an autocomplete field in there. It's either one field or it can be extractable to several, multi-list, tree list EX. And then the second piece, which I worked on for a long time and was very close to getting it working, except I think it was Firefox, believe it or not, is drag and drop. The ability to say like a multi-list or a tree list, select an item, instead of hitting the sort box left or up and down, you can select an item and drag it down to a selected location. So, unfortunately, I wasn't able to get that going. But,
Content tree? Sorting?
What?
Sorting in content tree or sorting in the field?
within the field. Chris?
Would any of this behind-the-scenes configuration work be manageable within sitecore?
So it's not exactly.
Within the configuration file?
Yeah, so some of this material, so for what's sourced from where the label is, I could see maybe like module config, so that to avoid a deployment to make a change like this?
Yeah, the reason I pulled it out into the configuration file, it allows for us to define the type. We can say like, all right, for this mapping, for these collection of templates, I want it run by this processor. Or, I want it to read it this way. And that's what allows us, for like media, for example, which would be this one here, you can see that there's no title field or image field defined. And that's because this class here, which implements iValier image, knows what to do when it's passed its arguments. So if you needed to create your own class file that will define that type of mapping, you're able to do so within your class library. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for coming down. Appreciate it. We have one more question. So.
Is this under information blackout?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I give my demonstration a week from tomorrow at 1:30. At that time, hoping Kevin or Steph will push that up to push the blog post up and all the instructional guides. So if you guys want this on your projects, let me know. I know a couple of you have it on your projects. And I have an instructional guide. It's like 11 pages or so that will walk you through how to use it. All right, well, thank you.
Class.
Maybe you should both know class.
Chris.
Yeah.
think I can find you like some notes, and we just go to stuff. Cool, so check that out. Concentrate. Cool. Thanks, man. Really nice.
Thanks for that.